Welcome to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, broadcasting from Melbourne, Australia. Greetings to all of you, wherever you are in the world. We are continuing our series on the Macedonian question, and in particular, the scholarly publication by Prof.d-r Igor Janev, titled The Prespa Agreement as a Cultural Genocide of the Macedonian National Identity towards the termination of an illegal treaty. This publication came out in late 2023, so only a few months ago. You may recall earlier we did a segment, and it was the segment chapter 5.2, I should say, and it was part 2. So I'm now going to continue with part 3. I think there are more than 3 parts. Yes, so we shall see. Let's do part 3. Professor Igor Janev's scholarly publication, which we are able to bring to you with his permission. Despite all the legally limited speaker's powers, remember that the person, Talat Jaferi, the speaker, but despite his limited powers to dismiss and block a referendum initiative, which was put together by the opposition party, Prof.d-r and a vague or an apparently odd interpretation of the Constitution. He interpreted it, even though he's not a legal, he hasn't got a legal background given by himself. Yes, alone, says the professor, we still may draw a conclusion that the question placed for the referendum vote, which we read to you earlier today, was indeed unprofessionally formulated by Vermeerau and the party Levica as well. A law for the ratification of treaties generally only provides that international treaty become the law of the land. And it appears that it's not sufficiently clear what happens when ratification is rescinded or revoked. In Article 13, paragraph 1 of the treaty with Bulgaria from 2017, it was provided that, quote, this treaty is subject to ratification in accordance with the constitutional requirements of the contracting parties. Now, we know the contracting parties are the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria. This treaty will enter into force on the date of the exchange of the instruments of ratification of both contracting parties and will remain in force for an indefinite period of time. An indefinite period of time, end of quote. However, revocation of ratification was never subject matter of international treaties. And thus Bulgaria, as the contracting party, may, for instance, interpret in case of domestic nullification that the other contracting party to the treaty is unwilling and unable to implement some of the obligations from the treaty. Those cease to be part of the domestic law, but other of an international character, or essentially all of them, may still be in force. Therefore, the international community and Bulgaria as a treaty party could only consider such judicial nullification of the ratification as a breach of contractual obligations, using the court's ruling as a tool, or bluntly an absence of a will to fulfill them. For Bulgaria and the international community, it's entirely irrelevant fact that the Constitutional Court in court provided a precedent for nullification in 2002, since the treaty in 2017 has only provided one mode of the termination of the mutual international obligations. Apparently, VMRO-d-r, this is the opposition party, didn't take into consideration that the legal aspect, that legal aspect, and it also appears that no one in the among the international lawyers, none of them were consulted when drafting the question for the referendum. Really? How could that be so? None of them were consulted when drafting the question for the referendum. What happened there? I would like to know. I'm sure you do too. From a political angle, that is the perspective analyzing the flow of events, the opposition in Macedonia actually demonstrated a low capacity to foresee the political events, such as the rejection maneuver of the president parliament, the Jaferi man, the Albanian, with respect to the drafted question for the referendum vote. VMRO-d-r was in fact caught stunned and with no answer or response to that developing event. Isn't that amazing? What was happening with them, I wonder? The leader of VMRO, Mickoski, gave the reaction on the rejection of the referendum, saying that, in quote, if this is indeed confirmed, then they sacrifice further deterioration of the relations between the government and the opposition. And I warn that the only responsible for that will be the government. The only party responsible for that will be the government in these difficult times because it does not show democratic capacity, end of quote. Despite that threat delivered by Mickoski, nothing happened. Neither the Speaker of the Parliament, Jaferi person, changed his position, nor, quote, the deterioration of the relations was an outcome. So, as we may conclude at this point, says the professor, VMRO-d-r was outmaneuvered by the Social Democratic Party, the SDSM, the ruling party, but not only that one, the other ruling party, which is in coalition, still is with the ruling party currently, DUI, once again. Essentially, VMRO-d-r at the very starting point didn't properly estimate the prospects for validity of the referendum, which, as pointed above, due to a high threshold census that is requiring 50% turnout, would most certainly fail. Secondly, the leadership of the VMRO, after a month of deliberation with all available so-called experts, proved to be with little to no capacity to formulate the proper question for people's referendum. I find that amazing. Couldn't they turn to the diaspora, maybe? Consult with them. We might have been in a position to give them some of our opinions and wisdom. In addition, VMRO-d-r showed essentially no capacity to overthrow the unsuccessful or the puppet government of the SDSM, despite all its failures, from economic disaster to COVID-19 management and catastrophic energy mismanagement. All efforts of the VMRO-d-r to overthrow the unsuccessful government has not borne any fruit or yield any benefit, says the professor. After and during the campaign for referendum, that is the initiative, VMRO blamed mainly the European Union for taking side or being biased. However, VMRO's criticism was not a radical to the EU conditioning, and it looked more like begging for a session in the EU. Vice President of VMRO, A. Nikolovsky, gave, for instance, a weak statement of criticism against the EU policies and the discrimination of Macedonia. Quotation, Bulgaria has been vetoing the start of the European Union accession negotiations with Macedonia for years. The Macedonians demand the same treatment from the EU as it granted to other member states which have already joined the bloc, end of quote. A fiasco of the policies of VMRO party and the entire opposition to overthrow the apparently puppet government of the SDSM has been, to some extent, an outcome of the bias policies of the EU, indeed, and a strong EU support for the government of the SDSM. some people refer to as the fascist apartheid policies of that government in power, still currently, unfortunately. For instance, recent support of French ambassador, by the way, mentioning that was my commentary, Silvana, not in the paper from the professor, making sure we are clear on what we are talking about here. For instance, recent support of French ambassador in Bulgaria, Florence Robin, in favor of the Bulgarian assimilation policy speaks itself for misunderstanding of the EU with respect to the illegality of the Bulgarian and the EU demands. French ambassador in Bulgaria confirmed the absolute EU support for Bulgaria for its extremist plans, and at the same time, encouraging Macedonian government to provide new disgraceful constitutional status for Bulgarians without any logical argument for constitutional revision or consideration of Macedonian national interests, which appears to be non-existent in the view of France and the EU. Well, you can now hear it loud and clear what the professor is saying on whose side are members, major members of the European community. Belgium, was it Belgium? The French? Yeah. The ambassadors representing those countries stating clearly what their position is and trying to convince Macedonia to do what is detrimental to the Macedonian state and its people. Quote, we gave European guarantees that including the Bulgarians in the Macedonian constitution will be a prerequisite for continuing the talks with Macedonia. Now, who are they, ambassadors, to be giving guarantees? And what form is this guarantee? Is it on paper anywhere? Or is this verbal information here say they're giving guarantees? Who are they to be giving guarantees? And did anybody ask them to give guarantees? I mean, this is quite annoying, wouldn't you say? Who are they to decide whether Macedonia should include so-called Bulgarians allegedly living in Macedonia to be included in the Macedonian constitution? And it will be a prerequisite. So it's an ultimatum. Do you see what Professor is talking about? They are actually giving conditions to the Macedonian government and the Macedonian people and all those other ethnic minorities residing in Macedonia, a prerequisite, a condition for continuing the talks with Macedonia on whether Macedonia will start negotiations with the European Union in regard to their intention to join the European Union. On whose side are they? It is clear on whose side they are. It is unbelievable. It begs belief. I, as an outsider who doesn't reside in Macedonia, nevertheless follows all the current affairs and goings on, and I'm sure you too, who are living abroad in the diaspora and in Macedonia and the occupied parts of Macedonia, namely the Macedonia which is occupied by Bulgaria and Greece, you can see on whose side the European Union is and what are they actually doing. I mean, this seems like a premeditated, pre-planned action, and they found friends amongst the ruling party, the ruling government in Macedonia, including that person I named, the Albanian, you know, the Speaker of the Parliament. He's not the Speaker of the Parliament at present because they are in election mode. Come the 8th of May, there will be presidential and parliamentary elections, and we hope that everything will be in accordance with the law and there won't be any interference from the United States of America and the ambassador in Macedonia, nor any interference from the European Union and the Commission headed by Ursula von der Leyen or any other party whose intentions are really exceptionally negative towards Macedonia and the people of Macedonia. I wonder what it is that is driving them. What is it that they are afraid of? What is it they are hiding? Why all this organized effort to one, change the flag, to change the name of the country to something that is absolutely ludicrous and exceptionally offensive to the Macedonian people? Why are they doing that? Can somebody answer? Is anybody listening to this in the European Union and the Commission and those up there in Kale? In Macedonia. Yeah, so this is part of the so-called French proposal. Well, there was never ever French proposal, was there? Silvana providing you with commentary now. There was always the European Commission proposal via the so-called French proposal, but really it was the Bulgarian proposal. They I should say, they wanted to execute it and they masked it as the French proposal. French proposal, which in practice is a European proposal, as the professor says, and I've just made the commentary on, and is included in the protocol signed by all parties. Oh, I don't know what happened to the Macedonians signing such agreements. Obviously, we've heard previously professors saying that they really lacked knowledge and expertise and didn't consult with anybody. And they didn't know what they were signing. So anyway, we believe that this will be a difficult process, but with understanding and explanation, it will bring reassurance, end of quote. So that was the quotation that I gave you, which I'm just looking up to see, yeah. So anyway, that was that quotation. Continuing on, basically this statement by the French ambassador, so it was the statement by the French ambassador, proved once again that EU and France couldn't grasp or understand the meaning and content of the category of sovereign cultural rights, or even concept of sovereign equality in general, or did they? I asked the question. Surprisingly, no one in Macedonia reacted to that disgraceful statement by the French ambassador Robin, which we've just mentioned earlier. For that statement and actual support for the ethnocide policies conducted by Bulgaria vis-a-vis Macedonia, the French ambassador Robin was decorated by the Bulgarian president Radev. Wow! They awarded him, they decorated him, they gave him the Order of the Madara on the 3rd of October 2022. Wow, he did a fine job representing the Bulgarians. Amazing. Ambassador Robin, assuming powers, all sorts of powers, and giving some kind of guarantee, these non-guarantees, what we call in Australian Clayton's guarantees. Clayton's. Look that up and you'll see what it means. It's an idiom used here in Australia. It's a Clayton's one. Clayton's. It should be noted that the French diplomacy in general have not taken into consideration more than a dozen judgments won by the Macedonians against the Bulgarian state decisions that proved to be illegal, delivered by the European Court of Human Rights. In addition, the French diplomacy should have known better that Bulgarian constitution does not recognize any national minorities at all, and that in international relations exists the principle of mutual reciprocity on such matters. I say that they do recognize, they do know, they're fully aware of these things, but they ignored them. Shockingly, the EU, German and French diplomats even did not know a basic historical fact related to the Bulgarian attempts and efforts to assimilate Macedonians into Bulgarians, or by pro-fascist regime conducted during the Second World War. A simple historical fact known even from textbooks for high school students. Silvana commenting now, I believe they do know, they've always known. Yeah, they do know. They know the historical facts. But my question to them is, what are they afraid of? Why? All this jumping up and down and producing some kind of agreements concocted by the Bulgarians and siding with the Bulgarians, as they did side with the Hellenic state previously. But the professor rightfully points out that the Bulgarian constitution does not recognize any national minorities at all, and that in international relations exists this principle of mutual reciprocity on such matters. But sadly or shockingly, the EU, the German, the French diplomats even did not know a basic historical fact related to the Bulgarian attempts and efforts to assimilate Macedonians into Bulgarians by pro-fascist regime conducted during the Second World War, a simple historical fact known even from textbooks for high school students. And finally, the EU and the US diplomacy couldn't realize the basic idea of the imposed and forceful assimilation as a misconduct related to the constitutional revisions as EU conditions, i.e. to establish Bulgarians not as national minority, since they do not recognize minorities even in their own country, but rather as the constitutive nation in Macedonia. Yeah, constitutional revisions of that type planned and demanded by the EU would only entail that Macedonians as a nation were an artificial nation, never existed, and that all Macedonians were in fact originally Bulgarians. Wow. Haven't they read the Bible? Obviously not. They're talking about Macedonia in the Bible. They're not talking about Bulgaria. They're not talking about Greece. None of those countries existed. But there is references to Macedonia. Many, many references. And that Macedonia and its people still exist, despite the attempts of others, we know who, in trying to change their name, their identity, the name of the state, the history, and the ethnicity. As the professor says, Prespa agreement is a cultural genocide of the Macedonian national identity. And that is a fact. We've got lots of evidence. We've been through 4 chapters already. We are on chapter 5, 5.2, and part 3 of that chapter. So there's a lot of evidence there. And it's not just Professor Igor Janev who talks about it. Okay, so where were we? Finally, the EU and US diplomacy couldn't realize the basic idea of the imposed and forceful assimilation as a misconduct related to the constitutional revisions as EU conditions, that is to establish Bulgarians not as a national minority, since they do not recognize minorities even in their own country, but rather as the constitutional, as being the main nationals in Macedonia, which they're not, because there are hardly any of them. And why would they have such a status? Other ethnic groups in Macedonia don't have that status. Okay. And that all Macedonians were in fact originally Bulgarians. Well, that's not the case, never been the case and never will be. Thus, ethnocide European Union conditions would only entail that Macedonians were Bulgarians in the past, present, and in the future as well. No such success in that department. They can only wish, but it will not happen. In conclusion, the EU and the Western states and so-called international community in fact supported the extreme ethnocide Bulgarians efforts for illegal Macedonian assimilation as a cultural genocide originally conducted by the Bulgarian fascist regime during the Second World War on Macedonian territory under the Bulgarian occupation. Similarly, with the Prespa agreement, the PA is more than evident, namely Prespa Treaty, the PA nullified the existence of the Macedonian minority in Greece and therefore elsewhere as well on the grounds of non-recognition of their identity. These aspects of the Prespa agreement or treaty is in sharp violation of the basic norms of international, customary, and codified law related to the protection of minorities abroad, as indicated previously. It appears that with the conclusion of the Prespa agreement, Macedonian government did not only nullify the existence of the Macedonian minority in Greece and in the world, but based on dismissed and renounced national identity provisions in general, erga omnes, ethnic Macedonian national identity erga omnes was not recognized and therefore abolished even domestically as well. Yeah, doesn't look like there's anybody clever or wise, this so-called North Macedonia artificial state. As indicated previously, the PA was an illegal act actually banning and prohibiting national identity to Macedonians, an identity that was entirely sold to Greek state nation by the puppet government in order to obtain a start for EU negotiations. Instead of recognizing and grasping a linkage between the two dubious identity treaties, that is the relationship between the Bulgarian treaty and the Greek one, that is the PA, and to advance proper question for referendum related to the termination of the PA as a number one priority, VMRO-DPMNE, that is the opposition party, decided to put on the table for plebiscite only a weak question relating to the law of ratification of the Bulgarian treaty concluded in 2017. And finally, after the unlawful rejection of that initiative for referendum by the government, that is the Speaker of Parliament, the Jaferi person, VMRO lost any plan, idea, or strategy for solving the actual problems with treaties and overthrow the government that supported imposed assimilation on the people. Now, I think I should like to end it there, and we'll continue for another session where we are going to finish. I'm determined for us to complete the chapter 5 too. So in the next segment, we will be completing chapter 2 in total, with all its parts. We are continuing our series dedicated to the Macedonian question, and in particular, the Prespa agreement as cultural genocide of the Macedonian national identity towards the termination of an illegal treaty, a scholarly publication by Professor Igor Janev, an expert on international law. And we are dealing with chapter 5.2 of that chapter. So Professor Igor Janev says, in conclusion, the European Union and the Western states, or the so-called international community, in fact supported the extreme ethnocide Bulgarians' efforts for illegal Macedonian assimilation as a cultural genocide originally conducted by the Bulgarian fascist regime during the Second World War in the Macedonian territory under the Bulgarian occupation. So he's reminding us what happened during the Second World War and the involvement of the Bulgarian state. and that the international community, the EU and Western countries, in fact, supported this Bulgarian ethnocide, extreme ethnocide, Professor calls it, ethnocide efforts for an assimilation which is of an illegal nature as a cultural genocide and conducted by the Bulgarian fascist regime during the Second World War. It wasn't that long ago, was it? Similarly, with the Prespa agreement, or the PA for short, is more than evident. Namely, the Prespa Treaty, the PA that is, nullified the existence of the Macedonian minority in Greece, and therefore elsewhere as well on the grounds of non-recognition of their identity. Now, this is a serious matter that Professor Igor Janev is actually making us aware of. I shall repeat this again. So he's saying, with the Prespa agreement, it is more than evident of what the Bulgarian state is trying to do, or the politicians who govern that state. Namely, the Prespa Treaty or agreement nullified the existence of the Macedonian minority in Greece and therefore elsewhere as well. Elsewhere means in Australia, in Macedonia, in America, in Canada, in parts of Europe, wherever the Macedonian people reside, as well on the grounds of non-recognition of their identity. So we have no identity, in other words. These aspects of the Prespa Treaty are in sharp violation of the basic norms of international customary and codified law related to the protection of minorities abroad, as indicated already. It appears that with the conclusion of the Prespa agreement, the Macedonian government did not only nullify the existence of the Macedonian minority in Greece and in the world by signing that agreement, but based on dismissed and renounced national identity provisions in general, that is the erga omnes. Ethnic Macedonian national identity, erga omnes, was not recognized and therefore abolished even domestically as well. As indicated previously, the Prespa agreement was and is still an illegal act, actually banning and prohibiting national identity to the Macedonians, an identity that was entirely sold to Greek state or nation. Professor Janev has put these words sold to Greek in quotations. Yeah, sold to Greek state nation by the puppet government of Macedonia in order to obtain a start for the EU negotiations. That's what they've been telling the people all along for the last 30 years. Yeah, we want to be part of the European Union. There is a procedure we have to follow. And because there are all these conditions by the European Union, and the United Nations conditions, we've got to do what they're telling us. That's what the government's been telling them. And they got apparently paid for all of that, for their widespread propaganda, trying to brainwash the Macedonian population, and sell them something that really was quite the opposite. Yeah. Well, now the truths come out, and we are able to, thank you to Professor Igor Janev and his amazing, well-researched and documented publication. We are able to know the truth and ask more questions, hopefully. Yeah. Has the Macedonian government, the current one, or the one that's, well, they're in election mode at the moment, so there is a technical government, so-called, and but the one that was in power up until recently, some would argue it's still in power. What's the evidence that they've actually done anything about getting into the European Union? And what are these promises that have never been delivered upon? So instead of recognizing and grasping a linkage between the two dubious identity treaties, that is the relationship between the Bulgarian treaty and the Greek treaty, that is the Prespa agreement, and to advance proper question for referendum related to the termination of the Prespa agreement as a #1 priority. VMRO-d-r, that is the opposition party, decided to put on the table for plebiscite only a weak question. That was a weak question, very weak, WEAK question relating to the law of ratification of the Bulgarian treaty concluded in 2017. And finally, after the unlawful rejection of that initiative for referendum by the government, namely, we've already told you in our previous broadcast, it was the Speaker of the Parliament, Talat Jaferi. Yeah. VMRO lost any plan, idea, or strategy for solving the actual problems with treaties and overthrow the government that supported the imposed assimilation. It was concluded by VMRO-d-r in June, July, and August 2022 on many occasions that early elections were necessary in order to save the country and the nation. The main strategy of VMRO, that is the opposition party, to realize that aim or objective, planning the overthrow of the government, mainly concentrated on the referendum in 2022, have finally failed with Speaker's rejection of that initiative. Nevertheless, popular support for the SDSM has also crumbled meanwhile. When it became self-evident to everyone that high threshold of 50% was in the actual turnout is unreachable, VMRO-d-r decided not to go further with a different question or a revised initiative for a referendum. In an effort to save VMRO from more embarrassment, the World Macedonian Congress, WMC President Todor Petrov proposed a reasonable new question for popular plebiscite, and he wrote, quotation, "Are you in favor of the Treaty of Friendship, Good Neighborliness and Cooperation of the Republic of Macedonia and the Republic of Bulgaria, published in the official Gazette number 12/2018 of the 18th of January 2018. The idea for that new formulation, according to the WMC's President T. Petrov, was that in the case of the absence of that 50% or turnout below the 912,000 people participating in the referendum, interpretation would not be that the people actually agreed to or supported the Bulgarian treaty and the EU conditions, but rather boycotted vote on the matter related to national humiliation, so that in fact the people rejected the treaty. Despite the good idea launched by Todor Petrov aimed to save the initiative for a referendum vote, VMRO did not accept that proposal. Instead of trying to improve the question and to realize an original scenario, at least for the goal of overthrowing the government, they abandoned the idea for referendum and engaged party in radical propaganda related to personal discreditation, particularly of the mental capacities of the Prime Minister. Namely, it was discovered by VMRO that the Prime Minister Dimitar Kovachevsky did not serve the army in armed conflict in 2001 under medical diagnosis of being incapacitated or ill, and question placed by the VMRO was whether Kovachevsky in fact fabricated, that is illegally, that certificate, or was he really ill to the extent of incapacity to serve the army. All in all, it appears that VMRO-d-r did not seriously devote the strategy of his party to the main goal for overthrowing the government, and that an entire opposition in similar manner as the SDSM started a dirty campaign in complete absence of political ideas. Namely, instead of capitalizing from disastrous SDSM's fiasco in national policy, erasure of identity, the erasing of identity, and other real problems related to the very survival of the Macedonian nation, VMRO party seriously turned to revealing crimes of the SDSM and DUI in order to discredit already discredited SDSM and political parties coalition running that government. Wrongful methodology of the main opposition party indicates that the political opposition in Macedonia will most likely need to wait for regular elections that are supposed to be held in 2024, writes the professor. Now we know that the elections will be on 8th of May this year, 2024. We'll most likely need to wait, unless some more other scandals show up in future. It appears, well, many scandals have appeared, but there hasn't been an election. It's going to be on the 8th of May, both presidential and parliamentary. It appears that VMRO-d actually adjusted its political campaign to the low level of political culture common to the vast majority of Macedonians in Macedonia. What was surprising for me, says the professor, after years of analyzing people's behavior, is that an average Macedonian would more likely respond to the alleged crime affairs when national pride is blatantly violated. In conclusion, a bottom line of ineffectiveness of the Macedonian opposition appears to lie in a generally low level of average political culture of the Macedonian people, which in fact doesn't properly value a concept of freedom or independence. Clear example of the political ignorance and complete unawareness of Macedonians for national interest was demonstrated in the Macedonian presidential elections, which were held in 2019. Deeply divided Macedonians among themselves in large percentage, that is close to 40%, decided to support SDSM presidential candidate Stevo Pendarovski, even after the disgraceful national name constitutional revision 2019, in apparently illegal way, smuggling a vote of the one MP as mentioned previously in previous discussions. All those who voted for Stevo Pendarovski haven't understood the national degradation, humiliation, and grave consequences of the constitutional changes in January 2019, essentially erasing the national identity and statehood. On the other hand, VMRO-d apparently couldn't grasp the final outcome of national identity transformation aimed at radical derogation of sovereignty, and particularly couldn't foresee its effect on the new Bulgarian demands and blackmails with respect to the EU negotiations conditioning. In addition, we may also notice that even after all anti-Macedonian policies were openly conducted or sponsored by the EU, NATO and the USA, VMRO-d still strongly supports NATO and EU, and especially the European integration of Macedonia, which is the highest party priority, surprisingly. Even after explicit support of EU and NATO for policies of SDSM as political adversary of the opposition, VMRO's support for EU and NATO remains unchanged. However, we can point out here that most of the Macedonian people appear to understand a level of betrayal of the government proposing adoption of Bulgarian criteria for EU integration. For instance, with respect to the French proposal, 72.8% of the Macedonian population included in the survey answered no to the question. The question being, would you accept the opening of negotiations with the EU at the price of Macedonia agreeing to the so-called, or for the price of Macedonia agreeing to the so-called French proposal, end of quote. Still, this negative vote in the survey was apparently an outcome of strong campaign by the opposition parties explaining to people that French proposal was in favor of assimilation and negation of them as Macedonians. Despite that, it appears that VMRO-d is strongly dependent on their Western mentors and thus unable to pursue its own national policy. This conclusion is self-evident from the fact that VMRO intentionally avoided all debates over the nullification of the Prespa agreement. leadership of this party, in the same manner as the leadership of the SDSM, dominantly rely on the support from Western allies and, in addition, Albanian political parties. Therefore, one shouldn't be very optimistic with respect to future patriotic maneuvers of the VMRO, as all Albanian political parties are against the idea for the nullification of the Prespa agreement and a Bulgarian treaty. Presently, it appears that VMRO's strategic commitment to align with essentially hostile parties from the Albanian bloc dispels any optimism that proper patriotic or national policies will be conducted in the near future. We could say that ultimately that outcome of political struggles in Macedonia and for Macedonia, its final Macedonian destiny, future of the PA and identity rests on the Macedonian people alone. If Macedonians choose wisely and terminate the Prespa agreement and the oppressive Bulgarian treaty, the nation may still survive the process of Bulgarian assimilation and extinction. Otherwise, it eventually will cease to exist, and the territory of the present state would be divided between the neighboring Bulgaria and Albania. This final outcome ultimately depends on national political leaders of the Macedonian people and their capacity truly to be committed to act independently in favor of the people and for their survival and the survival of national interests. I thank you for your attention. You've been listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you.